It's kind of wild how animated series can stick with us, right? And spark these really intense debates years later.
Oh, absolutely.
The Legend of Korra is such a prime example. You get these really passionate arguments both ways.
Definitely. Some people felt it was flawed, maybe a letdown compared to the
Yeah,
original.
exactly. While others will fiercely defend it, its complexity, how it grew the Avatar world.
It does make you wonder what creates that kind of split.
It really does. And that's basically what we're diving into today.
Right. We're not just rehashing old opinions, though. We're actually looking closely at some common criticisms leveled against Korra and exploring the counter-arguments for why it is a quality show. We're drawing from some really insightful video analyses that break this stuff down.
Exactly. And these sources, they cover a lot of ground character development, plot points, the themes, even the animation style.
Everything, yeah.
So our mission here is really to unpack all that, look at the arguments, the counter arguments, and hopefully give you a clearer picture of, the whole discussion around the show.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the characters. That's often a big one. A frequent criticism is that some characters, maybe like Bolin, felt a bit, underdeveloped.
Yeah, maybe just the comic relief guy.
Right.
And that's, a fair first glance. Bolin is often the funny one. And sometimes those roles don't get explored as deep. But if you look at his journey across all the seasons,
okay,
you see he has his own arcs. Like he deals with the messy side of being famous, his whole mover star thing in season 2.
Oh yeah, the movers.
And then in season 3, he really struggles trying to learn metal bending. He can't do it.
Right, which was tough for him.
Yeah, but that failure actually sets up his big moment later in season 4 when he discovers he can lava bend, which is totally unexpected.
Oh.
So maybe his complexity isn't the same as Korra's or Tenzin's, but he definitely grows. He finds his own unique strength. It's a solid arc, actually.
Okay, that makes... What about Asami, then? Another point you hear is that her development was mainly about seeking attention or something.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really track with her story, does it?
How so?
Well, think about it. Her dad betrays everyone, and what does she do? She steps up, takes over Future Industries.
Right, she becomes the CEO.
And she nails it. Secures that big contract, shows she's incredibly smart and capable. Plus, she has to navigate being a non-bender in a world that's all about bending.
That's a huge...
Exactly. And even with all the romantic drama early on, she forms these really genuine, supportive friendships later. Shows real maturity, forgiveness.
Okay.
Her story is about self-reliance, making her own way, is definitely not driven by, needing validation from others.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, let's talk about Korra herself. Probably the biggest lightning rod. Some argue she doesn't really change much.
See, that one I find hard to square with. The entire show.
Okay.
Her whole journey is the change. We see this clear evolution from the impulsive kind of headstrong Avatar in season 1.
Totally. Very punch first, ask questions later.
Yeah. To someone who, by the end, can offer real wisdom and counsel. Think about that scene on the bridge with the new airbender who's scared.
Oh, yeah. That was a powerful moment.
It perfectly shows her growth, her hard-won maturity, and each season throws totally different things at her.
Right, they weren't repetitive.
No. Season 2 is her spiritual journey. Season 3 is intense physical and mental trauma. And season 4 is all about her recovery.
That recovery arc was huge.
It's a massive, complex character arc across all 4 books. It's about moving away from needing external validation towards finding internal strength. Very different from Aang's journey, which was more tied to, the external war.
Okay. Speaking of tough journeys, that love triangle, Korra, Mako, Asami, definitely got people talking.
Oh, yeah.
The criticism is often just, it was messy, awkward.
And you know what? It was messy, but maybe that was the point.
How do you mean?
Well, they're teenagers. They're figuring stuff out, dealing with big emotions for the first time.
True. It's rarely smooth sailing at that age.
Exact. So the awkwardness, the drama, you could argue it's actually a pretty realistic portrayal of young relationship, especially if you contrast it with, say, the Tenzin Paimon situation. That felt much more adult.
Ah, okay. That's a good comparison.
And what's really interesting is how they resolve it. They eventually move past the drama.
Yeah, they stay friends.
Right. They genuinely care for each other, support each other. It shows maturity in the writing, actually, to let them move beyond that initial messiness.
Okay. Another point that sometimes comes up, the idea that Korra is always getting saved by men, the damsel in distress trope.
Yeah, that one gets thrown around.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at the show, it doesn't really hold water.
Give me some examples.
Okay, well, Korra rescues herself plenty, escaping Tarlok's bloodbending prison in season 1. All her.
Right, using her spiritual connect.
Exactly. Or think about fighting Kuvira's giant mech suit. Who helps her? Asami, Lin, Suin, other powerful women.
True.
And it's not like guys don't try to save her sometime, but often they fail, or they need help themselves. And Korra definitely rescues others, too. She saves Mako multiple times, saves Tenzin.
Okay, so it's much more balanced.
Way more balanced.
Yeah.
The show consistently shows her as incredibly powerful and proactive, not someone just waiting for rescue.
And we definitely need to mention the Korra and Asami relationship development. That went beyond just friendship.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the show builds that connection subtly right across the series.
You see their mutual support.
Yeah, and lots of situations. And then there's the fact that when Korra is recovering in the South Pole, who's the only one she's writing personal letters to?
Asami, not Mako or Bolin.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's a significant choice. And then, of course, the final scene of the whole series.
Holding hands, walking into the spirit portal.
It's all deliberate. It points to this deep, evolving bond between them.
Okay, that covers a lot on the character front. Let's shift gears now. Let's talk about the villains and the plot structure.
Sounds good. Villains are a big topic for Korra.
Definitely. So first up, Eamon in season 1. There's this accusation that he was basically pushing communism.
Yeah, that's a pretty common. Well, misconception, actually.
Okay, why misconception?
Because communism is mainly an economic system, right? Class struggle, means of production. Eamon wasn't focused on that.
His focus was benders versus non-benders?
Exactly. Social equality, or his twisted idea of it, bending away by force. A more accurate parallel, though still not perfect, might be some social justice move, like think civil rights, but obviously twisted into something dark and violent.
Okay, so not economic, but social hierarchy.
Right, and his actual methods and goals.
Yeah.
Dismantling the existing power structure, the bender-led council, that leans much closer to anarchism, really.
Interesting. Which brings us to Zahir in season 3, who was explicitly an anarchist.
Right. And what's fascinating there is that the season doesn't actually, endorse anarchy.
It seemed to show the opposite, didn't it? Chaos.
Exactly. It explores the failures and the dangerous consequences of anarchy through Zahir's action. The Earth Kingdom completely falls apart after he kills the queen.
Right, total power vacuum.
Yeah. So while Zahir makes some valid points about oppressive rulers, and it opens up good discussions about anti-authoritarianism, the season's message seems to be about the instability that comes from removing all structure, however flawed the old one.
Okay. Now, some critics felt the villains' ideas weren't explained clearly enough, like we didn't get enough depth on their motivations.
I'd argue the show actually spends quite a bit of time on that each season.
You think so?
Yeah, there are usually specific episodes or scenes dedicated to outlining why the villain believes what they do, what their plan is, and showing the harmful results of their ideology in action. We see it play out.
We see the consequences.
Right. It's shown more than just told.
Okay, another structural point, the shorter scene. Did that hurt the plot or villain development? That's a common complaint.
It's a fair point to raise. Shorter seasons do mean less time.
Yeah, compared to ATLA's 20-episode seasons.
Right. But the counter-argument is that generally the pacing within each Korra season felt pretty effective. They usually brought the villain's specific arc to a logical close within those 12 or 14 episodes.
Okay.
Although, interesting thought experiment, isn't it? What if they'd maybe dedicated 2 seasons to one villain?
Like 2 for Zahir, then 2 for Kavira.
Yeah, something like that. It could have potentially allowed for maybe even deeper exploration, especially since Kavira's rise is such a direct consequence of Zahir's actions anyway.
The transition was very smooth in the show.
It really was, which shows the writers were thinking ahead even with the separate seasons.
Okay. What about the new airbenders appearing after harmonic convergence, that cosmic event in season 2?
Ah, yes, the spontaneous airbend.
Some felt that undercut the tragedy of the air nomad genocide from the first series, made it less impactful.
I could see that perspective. The near extinction of the air nomads was incredibly powerful in Avatar. It's a core part of that world's history.
So did bringing them back negate that?
I wouldn't say negate, but it shifted the focus. It allowed Korra to explore themes of, rebuilding, resilience. How do you create a new Air Nation culture when the old one is gone?
Right. Tenzin struggles with that.
Exactly. So it doesn't erase the loss. The genocide is still a historical fact, but it moves the story towards, what comes next? Cultural evolution, maybe?
Okay. Another world-building point, the United Republic, how it was formed. There's some debate there, too.
Right. It's crucial to clarify it wasn't meant as a direct parallel to, say, American history or conquest.
Okay.
The lore says Aang and Zuko founded it together after the war. It was supposed to be this progressive, multi-ethnic nation where people from different backgrounds could live together.
Sort of a melting pot ideal.
Kind of, yeah. It came about because the initial plan, the Harmony Restoration Movement, faced resistance. So this was meant as a step forward beyond the old Fire Nation colonies idea. Very different context from like American expansionism.
Gotcha. And what about claims of plot holes or inconsistencies? Suin's character is sometimes brought up. Her views on leadership seem to shift.
Yeah, Sun, the sources we looked at actually suggest that maybe those inconsistencies were deliberate.
Really, like intentional hypocrisy.
That's the argument. That she's written as someone who is kind of self-serving, whose principles might bend depending on the situation. Adds complexity maybe, rather than being just sloppy writing.
That's a different way to look at it. Finally, on plot, some felt Korra focused too much on the villains, maybe overshadowing Korra's own journey.
I can see why someone might feel that, because the villains are very prominent each season.
Right, they drive a lot of the external conflict.
But I think that view kind of minimizes Korra's internal struggles. Season 2 is heavily about her spiritual journey, finding her own connection.
Connecting with Wan, the first avatar.
Yeah, and Season 4 is almost entirely about her internal journey recovering from PTSD, finding herself again after Zahir.
That's true. It was very character-focused.
So while Aang's journey was intrinsically linked to the external threat of the Fire Lord and the war, Korra's story, you could argue, is even more character-driven. It's about her growth, her resilience against these ideological and personal attacks.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift to bending and animation now. Core parts of this universe.
Absolutely.
One claim you sometimes hear is that bending in Korra lost its connection to martial arts, that it wasn't as inspired as an Avatar.
Yeah, that one's just, well, it's inaccurate.
Okay.
The creators were very clear that they continued that philosophy. Each element's style in Korra is still deeply rooted in real-world martial arts.
Can you remind us which one?
Sure. Earthbending is still based on Hungar Kung Fu, very grounded, strong stances. Firebending uses northern Shaolin styles like mantis, dragon, snake forms, aggressive, dynamic. Waterbending is Tai Chi fluid, adaptable, airbend, well, Baghua's hang.
So the foundation is still there.
Absolutely. It was a deliberate choice to keep that visual language consistent. It's fundamental to how bending looks and feels.
And didn't we also see benders borrowing from other styles?
Yeah, definitely. Lava bending is a great example. Bolin uses earthbending principles, but with a fluidity that feels almost like water bending, maybe, or fire. It's a hybrid.
Right.
And Kuvira's metal bending is incredibly precise and fluid, sometimes looking almost like airbending movements with how she uses those metal strips.
Oh, yeah, very agile.
And even going back to the original, Zuko learning lightning redirection by studying waterbending form shows this cross-pollination has always been part of the world.
Okay. And the show gave us some really creative bending too, didn't it? Resourceful stuff.
For sure. Like Suyin using pieces of her own metal armor as weapons or shields.
That was cool.
Or Mako using lightning generation down in that underground lake to make a path. Very smart.
Yeah.
Kuvira weaponizing tiny strips of metal from her armor. And Minghua, the waterbender with no arm.
Oh, her water arms were incredible.
Right, using water constantly as these super mobile limbs. Just fantastic examples of bending ingenuity.
Okay. Now, the animation itself, there's criticism that the quality dropped in Korra.
Yeah, you hear that sometimes, that maybe individual frames don't look the same as an Avatar.
Right.
But the counter view is that, while, yeah, maybe some still frames look stylistically different, the actual animation, the movement, the fluidity, the action choreography remained incredibly dynamic, often really breathtaking in Korra.
So the movement was still top-notch.
I would argue yes. The fight scenes, the bending sequences, they're generally very well animated, very fluid. The idea that there was some major degradation in quality, it feels a bit unsubstantiated when you watch the show in motion.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move into the themes and the lore, more complex stuff.
Right. Season 2 especially gets talked about a lot here. The spiritual side.
Yeah, the whole Rava and Vatu conflict. Some found it too simplistic, maybe. Good versus evil.
It can seem that way on the surface.
Yeah.
But if you dig a little deeper, it's arguably closer to something like yin and yang.
How so?
Well, they aren't necessarily pure good and pure evil locked in eternal combat to destroy each other. They're primal forces of like order and chaos, light and dark. One can't exist without the other, and their struggle is cyclical. Rava needs Vatu, Vatu needs Rava. It's about balance, not annihilation.
Okay. More nuanced than just good guy, bad guy.
Exactly. It adds this layer of cosmic balance to the Avatar cycle.
What about just introducing the Avatar's origin story at all? Some felt it was unnecessary lore, maybe demystified things too much.
That's definitely a point of contention among fans. Season 2, it had some pacing issues for some people. Maybe the villain Unalaq wasn't as compelling as others.
Yeah, he's often ranked lower.
Right. But the actual content, exploring Wan, the first Avatar, how the cycle began, the connection to Rava, it undeniably added a huge amount of depth to the world's mythology.
Gave context to the whole Avatar state thing.
Exactly. So Even if parts of Season 2 were divisive, that core lore expansion was pretty significant. It enriched the world, even if not everyone loved how it was delivered.
Okay. Circling back quickly to the villains and real-world comparisons, we talked about Amon not really being communist.
Right. His focus was social equality, the bender-non-bender divide. So the comparison to something like the civil rights movement, again, with that dark, coercive twist, feels more apt than an economic ideology. Though it's fair to say the show maybe didn't spend a lot of time explicitly showing the systemic bigotry non-benders face beforehand. It kind of assumes you understand that tension exists.
Gotcha. And Kuvira, often compared to Nazi Germany.
Yeah, that comparison gets made a lot, usually because of the uniforms, the rallies, the authoritarianism. But again, maybe a bit too simplistic. While both were authoritarian regime, their motivations and specific goals were different. Kuvira was about unifying a broken Earth kingdom, restoring order through force. Nationalist, yes. Fascist, maybe.
But not a direct parallel to the Nazis.
It overlooks nuances. A closer, though still imperfect, comparison might be someone like Chiang Kai-shek in China, another authoritarian nationalist trying to unify a fractured country. Complex.
Definitely sounds complex. Okay, another big theme in Korra, just change itself.
Oh, massively. Change is maybe the central theme of the whole series.
How so?
Korra's entire life is defined by change. The world changes rapidly around her technology, politics, spirituality. Her role as the Avatar changes. Her relationships change.
Nothing stays static.
Exactly. And her journey, especially overcoming the trauma in Season 4, really hammers home that dealing with change, dealing with hardship, requires vulnerability, requires adapting. It's a constant process.
Okay. So, final section then. Let's touch on some behind-the-scenes stuff and how fans reacted overall.
That's good.
One argument is that Korra tried too hard, tried to be mature or edgy, especially compared to Avatar.
Yeah, the edgy label gets thrown around. But you have to remember, it was still on Nickelodeon.
Right. A kids' network. There were limits.
Big limits. There wasn't really any explicit adult content, gore, sex, extreme language. It tackled more complex, mature themes. Yes, trauma, political ideologies, social inequality. But it did so arguably responsibly within those networks.
So, complex themes, not gratuitous edge.
That's the counter-argument, yeah. It wasn't trying to be edgy just for the sake of it.
And we should also mention the production side. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing for the creators, was it?
No. Not at all. It had what some call cursed production circumstances.
How so?
Well, it was originally pitched as just a one-season miniseries.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Then Nickelodeon ordered more seasons later, but often kind of piecemeal and during production. This meant the writers and animators were under immense pressure with really tight deadlines.
Wow, that sounds stressful.
Extremely. So the fact that the show turned out as coherent and high quality as it did, winning awards, getting critical acclaim, it's actually pretty remarkable given those challenges.
Speaks volumes about the team behind it.
Absolutely.
And finally, what did fans actually latch onto most? Was it the lore, the action, the characters?
Well, according to some polls and just general fan discussion online over the years, the characters seemed to be the thing that resonated most strongly with a lot of viewers.
Really? More than wanting like deep dives into spirit world lore?
It seemed so for many. People got really invested in Korra's journey, in Asami, Bolin, Moko, Tenzin, Lin, their relationships, their struggles, which kind of pushes back against the idea that fans only wanted more world building. They clearly connected deeply with the people in that way.
Interesting. Okay, so wrapping this up, it feels like The Legend of Korra, yeah, it definitely sparks debate and maybe has aspects that didn't land perfectly for everyone.
Sure, like any show.
But a lot of the common criticism, when you really dig into them, there are strong counter-arguments rooted in the show itself, in the narrative choices, the character arcs, the themes they were exploring.
Right. It offered a really complex, often compelling continuation of the Avatar world. Maybe different from the original, but with its own strength. Memorable characters, mature themes, handled thoughtfully.
Despite maybe some rough edges or divisive moments, the depth is there.
Exactly. And, just the fact that we're still having these detailed discussions, these passionate arguments about it years later.
Yeah.
That says something, doesn't it? About the show's impact, but also maybe about sequels in general, about how audiences engage with stories that build on something they already love.
What do you expect from a sequel? How much should it echo the original versus forging its own path?
That's the big question, isn't it? Korra definitely chose its own path in many ways. And maybe that's why the conversation continues. It really invites you to keep thinking, keep engaging critically with it.
Yeah. A provocative thought to end on. Definitely some watch it or even watch it for the